Hello, I am Leslie DeChurch, and I am the moderator of our scientific session on understanding and enabling human travel to the moon and Mars. Thank you for joining us. This is one of three pre-recorded videos focusing on one speaker's material before all of the panelists come together in February during our live discussion. In this video, Noshir Contractor will be discussing the predictive power of his team's crew composition model and their ability to use the model to anticipate and mitigate relationship problems, repairing crew members onto assigned tasks during a space mission. Midway through this video, Nick Kanas will be joining Noshir to further delve into the material.
Hello. Today I'm going to share with you some of the work that we are doing to help NASA prepare to send teams back into space, first starting with the Artemis mission that will put the first woman and the next man back on the moon, and then on to Mars. As we all know, the humans are on the verge of becoming an interplanetary species, and NASA is at the forefront of trying to help us prepare for that journey to Mars. The journey to Mars is going to be a long one. Because of the way the orbital dynamics work, it's going to take approximately a year or somewhat less than that to get there. And we will have to stay there for about a year before we can again come back so that we are in close proximity to return back to Earth in a timely fashion. Well, one of the things that we've also learned is that based upon the work that has been done by NASA's Human Research Roadmap program, they understand that as we think about long duration space exploration, some of the new challenges that NASA is going to face has to do with teamwork. And the fact that keeping people confined for a long period of time without any exit strategy is going to lead to some challenges. In fact, a cosmonaut, Valerie Reumin, said all the conditions necessary for murder are met if you shut two men in a cabin measuring 18 by 20 and leave them there together for 2 months. The idea of trying to decide how to put a team together under isolated, confined, extreme environments is not new. If you think back to the times when we were beginning to go first to Antarctica, Sir Ernest Shackleton faced many of the same kinds of issues when he was looking at it. He put this classified ad out that said men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter, long months of complete darkness, constant danger. And as you can see, that this did not necessarily attract people who were particularly interested in being social. In fact, some of the work that has been shown in that particular case is that places like the Antarctic became a haven for the technically competent individuals who were deficient in social skills. But this early view of selecting for extremes has now been replaced by a future view of selecting for extremes. This was a diary entry that Jack Stuster posted based upon what an astronaut had written in the diary at the International Space Station. Referring to the commander, he's brilliant and knowing the perfect balance of fun with professionalism. This move towards trying to get people who are astronauts and astronaut selection who will in fact be much more socially comfortable, not just in terms of technical competence, was also raised by Peggy Whitson when she was chairing the astronaut selection board in 2009. When she was asked about what kinds of things happen that would be important as they choose astronauts in the future, this is what she said: plays well with others. And in fact, some of the times we've seen that that has worked quite well. For example, astronaut Scott Kelly, when he came back to Earth after one of his longer missions out in space, mentioned that teamwork is what makes the dream work in spaceflight. So our research really is trying to look at what happens to teamwork under extended periods of isolation and confinement. And the roadmap that we followed to do that is listed in this particular flowchart. We started with a conceptual model, then collected some data, estimated the parameters, made sure that our model was valid, and then began to apply the model. So let me take you through these steps very quickly now. The first step was, of course, building that conceptual model. What are the kinds of things that affect crew performance? One of the things we focus a lot is the social relationships amongst the crew members. And the social relationships amongst crew members is affected by 5 buckets of variables that are important. One is the personality of the individuals. The second is the personality fit, the match between the personalities of different people on it. The third year at the bottom refers to the social network relationships. Prior social networks are obviously going to influence future social networks. On the bottom left out here, we see tasks and scheduling. To what extent are the crew relations being affected by the amount of workload they are facing, the amount of interdependence between them in the kinds of tasks they have to do? And then finally, on the top left, we see the contextual factors. To what extent are these relationships being impacted by communication delay? Because as we go farther and farther into space, just because of the laws of physics, it's going to take as much as 21 minutes for a signal to travel from Earth to Mars, for example, and then 21 minutes back. And so as we look at all of these models, we have to obviously identify, based on prior research, which of these factors are likely to affect social relations. But that then brings us to our second point, and that is, how do we then get the data in order to build these models? NASA, along with many other countries around the world, have created facilities that are called human exploration research analogs. This particular facility, HERA, that we studied, is based at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And so what we did was, from these space exploration analogs, we were able to get data from 12 missions between 2016 and 2019, where 4-person crews would go into this facility that you see on the left here. The scenario was that they were supposed to go on an asteroid landing. The missions ranged from 30 to 45 days. And the contextual variables was that in some cases they would be put into sleep deprivation, and in other cases they would have to experience communication delays. We noticed, for example, that when we collected social network data, asking them with whom do you work effectively and who makes tasks difficult to complete from day one till the end of the mission, we found something interesting. In one of the missions, we find that this person at the bottom here is clearly being seen as a hindrance by the fellow crew members, but this person is completely clueless that they are seen as a hindrance. Our question is, could we have predicted that this person at the bottom here would be seen as a hindrance by other members, and could we have done something about it? We took the data that we collected from these models and built a computational model of crew relations. And as you can see, it was using the data that we were collecting from the HERA facility to best estimate how much each of the factors that we had laid out in the conceptual model are contributing to the extent to which people get along with each other or see each other as a hindrance. The results are reams and reams of factors that we were able to estimate, et cetera. Just to give you an example of one of them, we find that crew members that tend to enjoy working with others who are high in self-monitoring. And this is because these individuals are less likely to be viewed as making tasks difficult, a negative coefficient as you see out there. Another example of a finding was that high workload, that is when the cumulative workload of the sender is high, those people enjoy working less with others, etc. As we go further, at the fourth step now, we've finished building up the conceptual model, we've collected the data, we have estimated the extent to which each of those variables in the conceptual model contribute to crew relations. Now we want to see how valid our model is. And so if our question was, can we use a model trained on one crew to predict what would happen in another crew? The answer is yes, we're getting there. Our accuracy was about 76% for the question about with whom do you enjoy working. It was a little less, 74% for who makes tasks difficult to complete. That then left us to go to the last stage, and that is from prediction. NASA challenged us and said, it's good to let us know who's not going to get along, but what can we do about it to preempt them not getting along or to repair that relationship? And so for this, what we did was we were looking specifically at one countermeasure, that is, how do we repair people so that we can repair their relationship? And the way we did this was we gathered input data before they went into the mission. We predicted who was not going to get along with whom during the mission. And then we worked with the task schedulers to see if we could tweak who was going to be working with whom on what task, so that we could then test the extent to which we could repair relationships that we thought were going to go wrong. And we did that by looking at two particular types of tasks. The rover task required 2 crew members to work on a simulated rover. The phobos task required them to work on a simulated geological sampling on asteroid. Well, of course, the goal of what we were trying to do was to maximize the number of days where the crew members lived working together and minimize the number of days where they found each other difficult to work with. We created a research design that allowed us to match different situations, putting people who we thought were going to do well together, and then putting in some cases people who we thought were not going to do well together. And our goal was to see if in both of these situations, the predictions we were making would come true. In the case of the Phobos pairing, for example, we found that in 3 out of the 4 missions when we made these predictions, those that we predicted would be working better together were significantly more likely to work well together than those we predicted would not work well together. In response to the question, who made my task more difficult? In, again, 3 out of the 4 missions, the pairs that we thought were going to make were going to report that their tasks were going to be more difficult together were indeed the same people in the other particular case as well. I want to close by thanking my dream team who has helped work on this project with us, and of course also thank all the subject matter experts at NASA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noshir. Now Nick Kanas will join the conversation. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, my name is Nick Kanas. I'm a professor emeritus at the University of California in San Francisco, and it's my pleasure today to be the discussant for the excellent paper that Noshir Contractor just presented. Having a cohesive crew on a long-duration mission to Mars is actually critical for mission success and crew member well-being. The work that you described today, Noshir, is very important in identifying interpersonal variables and countermeasures that can be used in order to attain and maintain optimal cohesion on the part of the crew members. I have just a few comments and some questions related to your very interesting paper. First, the long-duration Mars expedition includes a number of novel stressors that don't appear on orbit, such as increased crew member autonomy, the disappearing Earth phenomenon, and communication delays. I noticed in your data that communication delays were seen as a negative hindrance to crew interactions. Does this mean that communication delays enhance crew cohesion? And if so, how?
This was actually exactly what we found. And in retrospect, perhaps not that surprising, because what tends to happen in these situations is that when you have a crew that is working autonomously, that is cut off from mission control, for example, they have a tendency to circle the wagons and they set aside their differences and find themselves less of a hindrance to one another because they have to survive together. And that sort of increases the level of cohesion, if you may, or reduces the level of hindrance.
Okay, very interesting. That's an interesting finding. In your work, you focus on dyadic relationships in developing a workload plan. But in any group, the totality of interactions may add some component that's more than the sum of the individual dyadic interactions. That is, the whole may be more than the sum of its parts. I'm just wondering, how does your work explore some of the whole group factors that may influence a crew's cohesion?
We didn't talk about it in this presentation, but we've done a lot of work on looking at the dyads aggregated into things as simple as the density of the network, the centralization of the network, the factionalization of the network. And what we find quite interestingly is that these more network-based property of the entire team, the holistic, as you said, has differential effects in terms of performance within the team, et cetera. So even though here we are talking about the dyadic building blocks, the mechanisms of social network analysis allow us to look more holistically at the entire network.
Okay. In the research that I did, our team found that intra-crew tension could lead to a displacement of this tension to the outgroup, sort of the safer, more remote outsiders, such as people in mission control. And I'm wondering if your approach can identify the occurrence of displacement of negative affect to people back home on Earth when the crew is under stress.
So again, not in the research that I talked about today, but in related research that my collaborators are doing, we in fact do look quite a lot at the extent to which the ties that exist within the team is either impacting the ties outside the team, which in a sense is what displacement is talking about, or the reverse, where they sometimes build greater solidarity by looking at the mission control as the common enemy, if you may, or at least the common antagonist, if you may.
So that might be an indication of displacement occurring.
Exactly.
Very interesting. How do you test for that? Do you study the mission controls separately, or how do you look at the impact of the crew on them?
So in the case of the studies that we are doing in collaboration with the NEK facility in Moscow, That's where we have a few activities where we are getting data both from the crew itself, but also the people who are both in mission support at NEK. But we also have an activity where they are engaging in an activity where the 4 people at the Hera crew in Johnson Space Center engage in an activity with 8 people that are mission support, in quotes, but are actually students at our university. And we ask them questions about each other's interaction, etc. So that's part of where we're getting that data from.
Very interesting. Now, you found that self-monitoring is related to the tendency of crew members to enjoy working with each other. Does the self-monitoring that you're looking at include also the individual's monitoring of the interpersonal behavior going on in the crew as well?
That is, in fact, what it is monitoring. That is the main part of the concept. The self-monitoring notion is that I'm looking at myself, but I'm also looking at how others are looking at me. And we've heard this also in interviews with astronauts from the space station, that it becomes really important in a small cohesive team that everyone is mindful not only of their own interest, but is trying to make sure they understand every other person and how they are feeling and how that person is looking towards them. So that's the notion of self-monitoring.
So they can self-regulate the group a little bit.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Shifting the workload to better functioning dyads, you talked about doing this, may work fine in simulations where you have volunteers and they have equal skills and maybe backgrounds. But in a real space mission, the leader and his or her crew members have distinct skill sets that may not easily be shifted to someone else. Have you addressed this issue?
We have not addressed this issue. It's a very important issue. But I also know that as we think about these long duration space exploration, there is quite a lot of talk about the extent to which they might need to be overlapped to some extent in skills. And some of it may not be so much that these people can't get paired to do the work, but some of these things might then get time shifted a little bit where it might be necessary in order to be able to adjust it. And again, I want to clarify, it's not always that putting people together who are good is desirable, because what our research also finds that sometimes putting people who have a bad relationship together on a task that they both do well might actually help them improve their relationship, because nothing breeds better relationship than success.
Okay, and it looks like in the last minute we have, the last question I have is that a better functioning dyad you talk about may receive more work from a less functional dyad, which is great in terms of the workload, but it may be perceived as being unfair. How do you propose to deal with the resultant maybe anger in the overworked crew members who are receiving other people's work?
That's an excellent point, Nick. And again, what I would say is that in some cases, what you want to do is not just it's like no good deed goes unpunished, where someone is already doing well, you're giving them more tasks. But that's why you strike the balance and say, in some cases, I'm going to put people together in tasks who are not doing well in order to help them repair their relationship by giving them tasks either that they are both very good at, so that means they'll enjoy it, or giving them a task with a third person that they both like a lot, because that third person can play the role of a broker to mend their relationship.
Very interesting. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. We could go on, but I appreciate very much the work you're doing. I think it's very important, and I want to wish you the best in your future research.
Well, I want to thank you and be grateful for all what you have done to help advance the understanding of space psychology over the years. And so we owe you a lot of debt as well. And thank you so much for coming to participate here.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Noshir, for your remarks, and Nick for joining our discussion about human space exploration. Just a reminder that this is but one of 3 spotlight videos focusing on the individual work of the speakers before they all come together in February in the live panel on understanding and enabling human travel to the moon and Mars. Please check the AAAS annual meeting website for the panel's date and time. Again, thank you, Noshir, thank you, Nick, and to the audience. We will see you live in February.